This is probably the conversation I had in mind when I decided to start a podcast. Samy Kamkar is an old buddy of mine, a genius hacker. When you guys hear me praising the minds of hackers and how brilliant they can be and how they think, Samy is the example in my mind that I'm thinking of. And I always love to share him. I'm so thrilled that we finally get to do it here on the podcast. Samy's famous for having written a computer virus that he was using to meet girls on the internet, which is probably ill-advised. The virus he wrote took over MySpace. It was incredibly genius. What would happen is if you looked at Samy's page on MySpace, it would just automatically add you as his friend. MySpace is long gone, but you could imagine what that would be like on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat. So within 24-hour period, Samy had over 1 million friends on MySpace because the code not only would add you as his friend, it would copy itself to your page so that whenever anybody looked at your page, it would automatically add them as Samy's friend too. And it did one other benign thing, which is it would change your profile page to list Samy as your hero. Samy is my hero. I love him so much. He's done a lot of amazing, beautiful work in computer hacking. He has a YouTube channel that we talk about on here some, but you should definitely go watch his videos. I'm not going to interview Samy. That has been done, and I'm going to link in the show notes to the Tim Ferriss interview of Samy. I think of this conversation as something you could listen to with or without having heard that, but if you want to know more about Samy and his background and all the stories, then you can go listen to Tim Ferriss interview him. This is a conversation between friends. It's very soulful. There's a lot in here that I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys. Also, Samy is a co-founder of a couple of companies that have been successful. And he sold his most recent company called OpenPath to Motorola. I mean, this is not an ad. I'm just telling you because I'm impressed with what Samy built. OpenPath is a physical door access control system that's way better than those cards you used to have to use to get into your office. Now you can just do it with your phone and walk right in. Samy has helped build that product and the company is doing very well. And I think you should all become customers. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you, Samy at one point decided he wanted to become a DJ and learn how to make music. And he's the one who created the track that we use for the podcast intro that you're going to hear next. Please listen to this conversation with me and Samy. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it.
I've never met anyone like it.
He could hack anybody's phone in a matter of minutes. Who is that guy? Who can do that?
Carlos is the most interesting man in the world.
He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Inventor.
Wicked smart.
The master of cutting corners.
If you had a dead body in your trunk, who would you call?
He would get arrested immediately in a lineup.
I stood in line to get his autograph.
You know, his mouth can barely keep up to his brain.
I don't actually know what Pablos does.
A hacker magician.
Man of the future. Future.
I think there's a lot of parallels in our experiences with computers when we were young, but I'm older than you by about 15 years or something. So I started out on Apple II in 1979.
Oh, wow.
So I got an earlier start. And one of the things that I remember from my childhood was we played this video game called Ultima.
Okay.
Ultima was one of the coolest video games on Apple II.
Okay.
And it was one of these world exploring games. Have you ever heard of Ultima?
I remember seeing
You've heard of
Ultima online.
Ultima started out as Ultima 1 on Apple II. That one wasn't big, but by Ultima 3, it was really big.
Okay.
And it was kind of a world exploring game. You were like Knights of the Round Table or something, and you like went around and tried to conquer other lands and get in sword fights and shit. There was no internet, of course, no network at all. You had a floppy disk with the game on it. In those days, you know, the floppy disk had the entire OS for the computer and your game and your files and all that on a floppy. So you boot that up, and Ultima was awesome, fun game at the time. But it was a pain in the ass to get around this world because there'd be dragons over there, some mountains you got to cross over there. There's a huge ocean in the way over here. So one of the first things I learned to do hacking computers was you could read the disk in a different app called a sector editor.
Okay.
So floppy disks, like record players, basically had like a big groove with data on it. And you could go see the raw data in hexadecimal in a sector editor. And you could see literally every bit written on the disk. and it was stored in hexadecimal values. And so you could go learn what the hexadecimal value was. If I remember correctly, the hexadecimal value for water was 3F.
Okay.
But if you changed it to, I think, 68, you change a pixel of water to a ship. You would change all the water.
Awesome.
The hex editor, the sector editor didn't have search and replace. Computers were too fucking slow to do search and replace. So you had to, by hand, go look at every byte on the disk and find all the 3Fs and change them to 68s and then reboot. And when your game came up and you went into the world and you crossed over the land and found the ocean, it would magically all be ships instead of water. And you could just walk across, you could walk on water.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Since you had gotten into, hacking games and trying to cheat at them, that's where it started. This is, I presume that somebody else could tell you an even older story about cheating at games, but that's where it started on Apple II. That's what I remember, and then for me, I was like 9 or 10 years old, 11 years old. Then the next step was computers were just so pathetic. You could actually print out the entire disk. Or you could print out all your RAM. I only have 48K of RAM. So that's like enough. You could read it in a couple hours. I mean, all the machine code, this is a 6502, so 8-bit processor. It wasn't complicated. Like you could learn to read machine language. That's how I learned about computers. And so you could print out all the code. You could read it. So there'd be copy protection schemes on software, which were like pretty crude, but we could print it out and then go look through and find all the jump statements in the code. And because a lot of times that's what would be used to like escape you out if it wasn't the original thing. And it was looking for like, is this code stored at this exact position on the floppy disk? And then you could go and take that out of the code and then you'd be able to copy the games.
That's awesome. I mean, I still do binary modification today. Just inject jumps or change conditionals. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah. And it's great. And there's not that much of that these days, but it's so useful, especially when I'm just using applications. There's an application I really love. Okay, I really like. I love what the company creates. It's Autodesk. Autodesk is the company, and they created a bunch of cool software. Eagle is some software. I believe they bought Eagle CAD and they added a bunch of really cool features to it for creating circuit boards, schematics, layouts, and mill out boards, PCBs at home, and then assemble homemade PCBs for whatever I was trying to do, whatever I'm trying to prototype. Because I'm lazy, I don't want to send it to like a fab to print a legit board.
Just let me stop you there. You're lazy, so you don't feel like sending it to a fab to make the board for you, so instead you're making PCBs at home.
I am lazy too. I want everything as automated as possible, but I'm also extremely impatient. In 2 days or 5 days or whatever it is, when the board gets here, I'm going to be over it. I'm on to the next project. It'll be 3 months before I ever circle back to that. So if I can do it today, then I can actually have something in my hands working today. So that's really cool. And I just remember they came out with a new version of Eagle one day. And there's nothing wrong with this company. I'm not saying anything bad about them. I'm just saying like this is an experience I had, and it was just really interesting. And they had adjusted. Because I'm on the computer a lot, I like hotkeys and shortcuts. And they have this command line in Eagle, so I use it for virtually everything. If I can not touch my mouse, that's amazing. I love that. So I just type on there. And then in this new version, it used to be that your cursor was always in the command line because most people click, so it doesn't matter. For most people, it's fine. They just click around, do what they need. But for me, I'm always using the command line, so it's great. But then half the things I would do, it would get the cursor out of the command line. And I had to hit a new hotkey, an additional hotkey to get back in there. I was like, this is terrible. And the other nerds who were keyboard cowboys and cowgirls were like, hey, where'd this go? And this is on the forum. So we're all chatting on the forum. And I'm like, okay, it sounds like another version came out. They didn't fix it. I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I can fix it. So then I disassembled Eagle through a disassembler, found some conditionals, modified some conditionals, added some jumps basically, or changed a jump from not equals to just a jump. And then I released the patch on the forum. I think Autodesk lawyers didn't like that their software was getting reverse engineered. I'm a paying user. I wasn't pirating. I wasn't like modifying the protection mechanisms. I pay for their software. It's absolutely worth it. They didn't like that, so I think they took that post down. But it was a really useful tool. Unfortunately, no one else got to take advantage of it. I think a few people got my modification before they removed the post. Granted, I actually like their forum. They're very active. They listen to suggestions. I've sent hundreds and hundreds of suggestions, and they take a lot of them. So it's actually pretty cool.
How much PCB design are you doing?
It's not even that. It's just if there's something I don't like, I document it. And if I can just share that with the creator, I share it. Or if I can make a script to improve it, then I'll do that. So I just did that a lot. And every time I work on something, this would be a nice UX improvement. This would be a nice UI improvement. This would improve people's workflows. So I just kept doing that in a loop. And I go down a ton of rabbit holes because of that. That's just how I like to spend time.
Yeah, awesome. From an early age, getting software was hard. These childhood memories of my parents driving me across town and dropping me off at some dude's trailer park or whatever to meet up with some sketchy old dude to swap floppies.
Nice.
That's
not a euphemism?
Nope, that was real.
Okay.
Swap floppies. It was so weird, just because I wanted to see what the computer could do.
Okay.
And a piece of software was a way to like see what the computer could do.
Okay.
And so I wasn't going to use any of this stuff. I didn't have anything to do. I just wanted to like fire up this program, see what it did. And then a lot of times, just because I couldn't afford more floppy disks, I would have to write it over with the next thing. You know, basically internet for most people started in 95. So by the late 90s, you'd have software online you could download, which for me was amazing. Because I could just get this drip. And there were websites that would show you every day what's new. And there'd be new apps on them every day. And so I would just go download new software every day.
Yeah.
And probably up through 98 into maybe 99, I think I used every piece of software ever made.
Okay.
I was a junkie for that because I would get it, run it, click on everything, figure out what it did, and then delete it.
Okay.
And I would just do that every morning. That was like my morning ritual. Like run all the new software. And just fill my head. I'm driven by this belief that computers can actually be useful for people. But in order for that to happen, like somebody has to make the software for them to become useful. Probably sometime in 99, it got too fast. I couldn't keep up anymore. And since then, of course, like there's way too much software in the world. But I think like the way other people want to listen to new albums or whatever, I wanted to play with software.
That's really interesting.
So the whole point of that is just that I have those observations like, oh, this sucks or this could have been done differently, whatever. It's rare that I reach out to the creators. Maybe once a month or less, I'll send an email because I'm using your software. I love it, but it doesn't work here or whatever. I do that rarely.
Okay.
That's cool that you do it.
Yeah, and I write software. I don't write as much software these days, but when I used to write software, I like when people reach out to me and are like, hey, this would be an improvement. I may not agree. Usually what people, if they do contact me, they have good suggestions or bug fixes, or they're like, you misspelled this. And then sometimes I'm like, that's a good idea. I'm not going to do it. I'm busy with other things. It's open source. Go do a pull request. It's on GitHub. So sometimes I'm also like, why do you expect this for my free open source software? Do it yourself. I'll pull it back into the master branch. So I'm happy to accept something if it's helpful.
How often do you get something that's helpful?
I'd say almost every pull request on my GitHub projects are helpful or are useful in one way or another. I don't think I've ever seen anything where I'm like, I don't like what you're doing. Maybe a few times. It's just sometimes maybe the code is not well done or it's not consistent with the rest of the code, or it makes a breaking change because they didn't consider something else. I still appreciate that people do that they try to change stuff. And I do the same, right? If there's something I want, if it's something I can open source, then I'll try to do it myself first. But something like Eagle or Fusion 360, those aren't open source. I still sometimes try to do it myself.
Patch the binary.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been a big fan of Autodesk at times. There were also times when I thought Autodesk was evil. Now it's a massive company, and so there's probably just lawyers whose job is to shut down anything that seems weird.
Yeah, I understand that. I wasn't too upset about that. And I like Fusion 360, so that's a ton of fun. I use that a lot more these days, actually.
Kind of a breakthrough CAD program in a sense. Like I said, I'm pretty much an expert at understanding software.
Okay.
But CAD software was so convoluted and difficult for me to understand. I remember like the first time I tried to learn Pro E 20 years ago.
I've never heard of it.
It's big in automotive.
I haven't heard of virtually any CAD software other than AutoCAD.
CAD software was so obtuse. I found it wasn't very accessible because I couldn't just design the thing I wanted to make. You have to start by like designing like how you're going to make it, starting with industrial grade CAD software. You can't just draw a circle. Okay, it's going to be this material. You're going to use this tool in this type of machine to make a circle. It's that kind of stuff. You know, I love thinking that way, but it was hard to learn. I thought Fusion 360 was cool because it seems like anyone can learn it. That and Inventor, AutoCAD Inventor, so accessible.
I think when I started using their software, I'm on Mac, and I think it was Inventor Fusion that was free. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then that was really cool. It was also really fast. Granted, I'm still running my 2014 MacBook Pro.
Why?
So why? I don't know. It's like my machine. I usually
You don't upgrade your MacBook?
No. I mean, I upgraded the 2014s. They said they maxed out at 8 gigs of RAM. That's incorrect. They actually maxed out at 16. So
In a MacBook, so you had to mod your own MacBook?
Oh yeah, and I love modding stuff.
Wait,
that's
did
really
you?
fun.
But it's soldered on in there, isn't it?
No, not in the 2014.
Oh, okay.
I think it was like 2015.
Oh,
I mean,
so you
honestly,
could-
I would just desolder and I would just get larger chips. You know, it's component assembly, right? So there's nothing preventing you from desoldering something and soldering something on, right?
Yeah.
As long as the footprint's the same, and as long as the hardware supports it.
Yeah. Do a RAM upgrade by resoldering the chips on?
I desoldered a faulty capacitor on that actually stopped working. Like the motherboard died, and that's what happened to my 2011 motherboard died. They call it the logic board, I think. And I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. But by the time it happened to my 2014, granted, a few years later, so maybe 2017 or something, the motherboard died. I was like, oh no, this is my favorite laptop. Now everything's harder to do on Macs, not harder in the hardware. So I'm gonna have to upgrade. And I'm like, no, I've been learning a little bit of hardware stuff. Maybe I can figure out what the problem is. So I opened it up and I'm trying to think how I solved this. Oh, yeah, I watched a lot of videos of people repairing stuff on YouTube. And I remember in one of these videos, someone took alcohol, like 99% alcohol, and sprayed it on a board. I forget what the board was, but it was powered on and they started spraying 99% alcohol. You usually don't want liquids on circuit boards, right? On live circuits.
It's counterintuitive. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's because typically liquids, water itself is not conductive, but most of the tap water that we have does have minerals and stuff that do make it somewhat conductive, and then you're going to create a short. But 99% alcohol is non-conductive and it evaporates very quickly.
Yeah.
So you spray it on and then you start to see where it evaporates immediately. And that means there's a lot of heat.
Wow.
And I would do that a bit because I felt heat, but the components are so small, I can't tell which component. It feels like something has shorted. Maybe a capacitor, most likely a capacitor. On almost any electronics that breaks, the capacitor is typically the first thing that broke.
Yeah.
It's typically the first thing. It creates a dead short, or maybe an open. But I found that trick, and I didn't think this would work. And I found something and it immediately evaporated, and I sprayed it more and more and smaller, and found it's probably that. I desoldered this, and my computer booted up. I didn't even have to replace it, which is amazing.
You took it off.
I just took it off.
Yeah.
I didn't replace it because I didn't have a capacitor that size of the right farads. And it still worked because most capacitors are helpful. Often, not every capacitor is required. They're not critical, but they're helpful if your power is sagging. Then they'll prevent your system from crashing. But as long as your power never sags, then it'll never crash.
Yeah. Wow. It's hilarious and amazing to me that you are using a 6 or 7 year old laptop and that you remember your previous laptop from 2011.
I love the 2011.
Oh.
Because the 2011 had the DVD drive. So I removed the DVD drive and added a second hard drive. I had 2 hard drives in my MacBook. I don't think you can buy a MacBook with 2 hard drives today.
No, but you don't need to because you can get 2 terabytes of SSD.
Yeah, but if you get 2 drives, you can have 4 terabytes. And I'm maxed out. I'm constantly maxed out. I mean, I only have a terabyte, yeah.
Well, you can plug in USB-C and duct tape one to the back.
That sounds awful.
Oh, okay. All right, great. I think I probably had similar sentiments a long time ago, but I've since determined that other than my glasses, the thing I use the most is my computer.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to spend as much as possible on my computer and have whatever the newest, best thing I can get my hands on is. I've probably been through 6 laptops since 2014, maybe more.
I see.
Not to say I'm doing anything that on this Mac that I couldn't do on my 2014 Mac, whatever it was, because I'm probably not. But yeah, I just keep going. I can't wait for the new ones to come out.
Interesting.
This one is the newest, fastest thing you can possibly get.
Awesome.
And I can't wait for the new one because I expect it to have 4 USB ports.
Oh,
This one only has 2. I had one with 4 USB ports previously.
Oh, I see.
But when they went to M1, they went down to 2 USB ports. I've never once needed more than 2 USB ports.
Okay.
I don't have any use for them, but I can't wait to get them. And I suppose that you could probably add USB ports to your Mac if you wanted, but I haven't done that. Macs are not very inviting to do hardware hacking on, so it's just very impressive that you've even...
They're not inviting, but I also think that's really interesting. You probably get this for people, what kind of phone you have, and you say iPhone, and like, I don't understand. Why don't you use Android? Because it's open source, and it's much more open and friendly. I think it's interesting because I love Android. I think that it's awesome that there is an open source platform that anyone can use and run whatever they want. But I use both, and I really like iOS way better because I love the UX and I love the UI, and it like doesn't make me upset. I don't yell at my phone as much versus an Android device. And I use both for testing, but people need to understand that you can do anything on your device. Like you actually own your device and you can modify it in any way you want. Yeah, it may be a different route. It's not using the source code. It's just using the binary code, the machine code, right? Just like you're editing your 3F to like 6.8, you can still have full control. So I jailbreak, and I now have, a root shell, and I reverse engineer whatever binary I want, and I make modifications. I use Frida, which is an awesome tool, Frida. It's like my favorite tool. I don't know many people that use it, some reverse engineers, but Frida is this really cool software that works on Mac, Linux, Windows, iOS, Android, probably other platforms. And it lets you perform introspection. That means you are sitting inside of a process, any process you want, every process if you want. And you're sitting there and you have either a JavaScript or Python shell, and you can access everything. Even if this software, whatever app you have running that you want to modify or inspect, you have a shell into the app where you can access all the functions, you can access all the memory, and then you can rewrite the function to call your function first, right? And then you can call the actual function, maybe get the return value, and then modify the return value, and then return back. So you can sit in between anything.
Interactive disassembler. I think that's what IDA means.
But that's what IDA is. Yes. So this is called Frida. I don't think it's based off IDA at all. I use IDA Pro for disassembly, but
it's not. But it is a disassembler.
You don't actually have a disassembly view.
Oh, you don't even see that.
No, all you have is a shell, and you might not even use a shell. You're writing software or little scripts or functions that you're then injecting into your process. So if I'm using my iPhone and I want to see what my bank software is doing, and it's because this is actually something I do. So I use Mint and .com. So I have all of my bank and credit cards and stuff connected, and I check that, and it tells me how much I owe, and it's really great for tracking, and it's free. I love it. And I started using this other bank, and it connects to Mint, but every time I connect, it says I need to verify, and I need to do like a 2FA.
Yeah.
Even though when I connect to the bank, it doesn't require me to do the 2FA. So for whatever reason, Mint makes me do this. So I actually wanted to see how Mint was connecting, but Mint uses TLS, and they don't allow you to intercept the communication, even if you install your own certificate authority. But with Frida, I can inject myself into the process and then say, Sammy's public authority is a true, cryptographic authority. So you can totally respect that. And now I can intercept communication and modify stuff.
Yeah, or you could just shut off the check. Wow.
So it lets you very easily control the software.
This is an exciting thing to talk about because I think one of the big problems we've had for you and I, the computers we probably got early on, you could see the code for everything. But iPads and iOS in general, things like that, it's like the hood's welded shut. It gets pretty hard.
It's harder.
You feel like with Frida, you can see everything.
Well, I feel like for Frida on the software side, it allows you to do a lot of that. And I think we shouldn't have that assumption that things are welded shut. I think people tell us things are welded shut just because the way we used to do stuff isn't the way it works anymore.
Right.
It just means we need to look at it differently. We need to find another lens and look at it from a different point of view. And then you'll start finding a whole host of new issues.
Yeah, right.
It's harder because you spend a bunch of time learning something, and that's useless now. That information is not as useful. But I think we can always draw parallels.
It's interesting because if you think of the perspective of hackers using Linux, like their perspective is, I can get the code for anything, look at it, mess with it, change it, update it, patch it, do whatever I want. But your perspective is that you're just like, I got binaries.
You learned assembly. You learned assembly. And now the code, because you know what the CPU does. It's at the end of the day, whether you're you compiled from source code or you're running a binary, it's your CPU that's interpreting it.
An interesting point is, then it's like knowing every computer language.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what language was used. It's all going to get assembled.
Correct. Yeah. And to be fair, it is more difficult, right? It's more challenging. Assembly is simpler, which makes it worse in many ways because a simple for loop is going to be 20 lines of moving memory around and throwing into registers. But you start to see patterns just like you do in anything else.
That's really cool. So Frida works on all those platforms, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I've never played with it.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And
so on iOS, if you jailbreak and load Frida, you can actually watch the processes.
You can inject into any process. Yeah. You can dump the so Apple encrypts every application, and then it's actually unique per device. But you can run from within the process and essentially dump a binary. and then you can extract the binary and then pull that onto your computer and then disassemble the binary and modify that.
Wow.
So you can then modify the binary if you want to permanently patch it and make it do something differently. You can create a little script that says, no, every time you do this TLS check, I'm going to ignore it and always say, yeah, this is a correct certificate of authority, so you can inspect old network traffic.
Yeah.
So I will connect my phone to my Wi-Fi, which my Wi-Fi is actually a computer, and then that will intercept my traffic when I want to start inspecting what different apps are doing. And then I can see all the network traffic that goes by, and then I can modify that. I can intercept that with other software. Charles is really nice, really easy to use. It's I don't know if it's for Windows. It might be. That's really cool software because, you can just see what apps are doing and you can modify what they get.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
You can try this all at home, kids.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if you burn down the house, don't call us. No, that's awesome perspective. I think a lot of people, even a lot of hackers, don't get that far. Certainly computer programmers in general don't get to thinking they can understand machine code.
Yeah, and it's cool if people are into Arduino, and I was really afraid of Arduino and microcontrollers and hardware for a long time. And I think because I kept looking on the internet, what's the best book to learn electronics? And everyone said Art of Electronics. So I got Art of Electronics, and by halfway through the first chapter, second chapter, I'm like, I don't understand any of this. It's just like math. I was talking about capacitors. I don't know why, this is going to be a long, dark road.
No, that's the whole point of Arduino is you don't have to learn all that shit.
Yeah, and one day someone actually handed me Arduino and said, hey, you can write a program. I'm like, I know how to program.
Yeah.
And I looked it up and I wrote a couple lines of code and I made a light turn on. I was like, whoa.
Isn't that amazing?
Crazy. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's like most nerds have never done anything that had a physical effect.
Yeah, and it's very cool that Arduino made it that easy.
Yeah.
And then I remember I was like, I'm going to make it bigger and cooler, and it'll have a bunch of lights, or more power. And I put more power in it, and I had an LED. I had a bunch of LEDs, and they all burnt out. I was like, what? And that's when I learned that I looked up, I burnt out my LEDs. How'd that happen? Bill, you need to know resistors. I was like, oh. And then I was like, I remember they're talking about resistors and electronics. So then I went back, I was like, wait, now this is interesting. Now that I have application. And I think for me, if I have application, and it's not like a long, grueling, 2 years of my time that I have to learn to do one thing, then I'm way more motivated because
that's why I think is fun about programming and about coding is you can try it. I learned that way. I learned through disassembly. That's how I learned. You learn by try something, tweak something, see what happens, run it, crashes, start over, just keep going, and you can learn by trial and error. That's how I learned to code, was trial and error.
Yeah.
And now you could go to college and learn how to code via software development. I don't even know what software development engineering is like. What's software engineering? It was invented long after I started code. But the point is there's so much you can learn from trial and error, and I think it's very rewarding. I think there was moments like that for me, it was on that Apple II and then later on mainframes and stuff. But HTML was like that, especially at the beginning when it was all super observable. You could just see how a web page worked. And that's how people learned to make web pages. And it's not like HTML had no logic. It wasn't even a programming language, but it was observable because every browser had view source and the source wasn't complicated. And so you could learn how anybody did something in HTML that way. And I think it made it was accessible enough to get a whole generation. That's a whole generation learned about computers and learned to at least read HTML from that. And then, hackers a lot learned from packet sniffing. Before we succeeded at getting fake encryption everywhere, you could just see all the traffic on a network. And so then it became inviting to say, oh, I can see all the traffic. What happens if I change the traffic? Like you're talking about. And now it's a couple steps removed because you got to subvert the SSL or whatever's happening in the middle, subvert the encryption and stuff. So it just gets a little further removed. And I think it's cool that you're keeping up in a way. There's no point, I think for a lot of people at some point, now it's encrypted, so no more packet sniffing. So they give up. And you're not giving up. You're going further with it and maybe discovering really what is an accessible frontier for learning from trial and error. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I just like access to my stuff.
Yeah, awesome. But then sticking with it that long. Arduino, especially for anyone who doesn't know, the inflection point with Arduino is interesting because before that, you had to read The Art of Electronics. You had to understand all this like voodoo type stuff about capacitors and resistors and all the different stuff. Like, it was really difficult to understand voltage levels and get an oscilloscope and see what's going on. I never got adept at that. And the thing about it was you had to do all that just to make the light come on. You had to learn all that shit. And then also the microcontrollers were not open source. They were very proprietary. You had to spend $5,000 to get the SDK from the microcontroller company. It was all very difficult, very inaccessible. And the cool thing about Arduino and then Raspberry Pi is it transformed electronics into Legos, into software. It made every electronic thing. So lights, sensors, motors, switches, rheostats, all that stuff. It just turned it into little software Lego bricks that you could then play with if you could code. And I think that probably, it was the starter drug for you. Once you had Arduino, then you could go backwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
But starting from the art of electronics is not inviting.
Yeah.
I think it's like anything else. Like, if you start with this academic view, then you got to do so much work up front before you get any reward. That's not how people learn.
Yeah, not me at least.
It's not you, and I think it's a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And they just don't even know. I think you and I are so lucky because we found, one way or another, we found a learning style. Our learning style is reverse engineering. Our learning style is grab something and try to break it and see what happens. I feel like I'm so lucky to have discovered that early. I didn't realize when I was a kid that's what I was doing, but looking back, that's the best. Like, in schools don't fucking do that. And I think that's one thing I just think about a lot is I think you're smarter than me because you didn't keep going to school. I didn't go to college, but I finished high school, and now I look back and I think I shouldn't have even done that. I tried to talk my daughter into dropping out of school and playing Minecraft when she was in like 6th grade. She won't do it. She's in high school now, but
She sounds smart.
she's not smart.
No, she sounds smart.
No,
I think she is.
She is smart. She chose to stay in school. But I'm not saying everybody should drop out of school, but there's a big difference between like education and learning.
Yeah, to be fair, I was bad at school. Like, I didn't know how to learn.
You were bad at school.
Oh, I was really bad. I didn't know how to learn. It just felt like most of a waste of time. Not because I thought it was wasteful. It's just because I couldn't memorize the stuff they were telling me to memorize.
Yeah, no, school was bad at you. Just to go on a little rant here, there's nothing that makes sense about the setup. You and I went to schools where, like, listen to a teacher, tell you some shit, read the textbook, and then memorize all the crap, and then take a test that shows you memorize this stuff. And it's not real. I remember learning that we've had fMRI for about the last 15 years, which is brain imaging on live brains using giant magnets.
Very cool.
Before that, everything we knew about brains we learned from studying dead ones.
Okay. Was there any Hannibal Lecter in between?
I don't know. Studying like throwing electrodes on a live brain thing, but we couldn't see what was going on. We couldn't really, with any granularity. Even now. But one fascinating thing in an fMRI is if you're in an fMRI and you're doing something that you're interested in, the whole brain lights up. If you're doing something you're bored with, it's just little blips here and there. Brains are optimized for learning what they're interested in. And nobody in a school is taking responsibility for making something interesting. Occasionally you get lucky to get a cool teacher who makes something exciting.
Yeah.
That's rare and doesn't scale. And even if they can make it interesting to some kids, they're probably not making it interesting for the other kids because they got 30 kids. They're not all the same. I don't know. I just think it's a fucked up system. Anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. Granted, I wouldn't know how to fix it. Like, I don't want to say it's broken. I wouldn't know how to alter it to make it work differently for different people. Because I think some people are awesome, right? They love it and they're really good at it. And some people are not. Yeah, and that's challenging.
A lot of people are good at it because they want to learn the rules and they want to play the game. Yeah. They want to follow the rules and they want to do, and the more structure and clarity there is around the rules, the more they can do that. It doesn't mean they're learning. It means they're playing the game well. And even though it's totally fine, it's out of your jurisdiction to figure out how to solve education, I'm interested in this because I think we're the success stories. We're the dropouts who succeeded at figuring out how to learn. We didn't figure out how to play the school game, but we figured out how to learn. People who succeed, they succeed in spite of school a lot of times. They succeed in spite of the attempt to educate them. You succeeded in spite of attempts to educate you by figuring out that this isn't working. You know, your view of it is that like, well, I sucked at school, but my view of it is that school sucked at serving you. And then you managed to go learn anyway. The computers for you and I were bottomless pits of intrigue. It crashed. Well, what if I put in a 0 instead of a 1? Oh, it doesn't crash. You know, like so you know, and you could just go deeper and deeper. And my experience with that was in physical isolation because I was in Alaska. And you had some similar experience where you were basically, you know, in your, you know, home alone forever and just digging deeper and deeper into the computer. And because you were interested in it, you could put the hours in, the frustration. Like learning computers is very frustrating. They suck. And they're relentlessly unforgiving. It's not like, oh, you got pretty close. Good job, kid. No, it's like, nope, crash, boom. And for me, you know how long it takes to boot an Apple II? Then get it to load to some code? You know, I got an 84. I got one of the first 1,000 Macs ever made.
Wow.
And that thing takes forever to boot, you know, off a floppy disk and crashes. And then you got to boot all over again. Like you can only, my learning speed, when I finally got, like when I hit it big by the late 80s, and I could convince everybody to let me have their computers, I had 3 Macs in front of me at all times.
Nice.
One I was using, like giving it a command. One that I was waiting for it to show like progress bar on the screen, just computing. And the third one was rebooting.
Okay.
And I would just keep 3 Macs busy all the time.
That's really funny.
Because then they didn't have multitasking anyway. You could only do one thing per Mac.
That was your alt tab.
My alt tab was switched to the Mac that was that was done rebooting. Oh God. Anyway, all right.
Amazing.
So all I'm trying to say is there is something you can contribute to this here. Like picking apart your experience is so valuable because you learned how to learn. And you think of it as, oh, I sucked at school and I'm a dropout and I failed at this and that. And what you actually figured out is like how to be wildly successful.
In some things.
Doing stuff, figuring things out, making stuff. And we're not all good at everything. In fact, none of us are good at everything. Like I suck at a lot of things. And I don't know, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of that is now kind of going deeper and deeper into computers brought me into hardware. And then going deeper and deeper into hardware is now getting me into physics. Which is pretty cool.
Okay.
Because that's ultimately how everything works, right?
Yeah.
At the hardware level, it's really just electrons moving across conductors, and pretty much everything's electromagnetism at that point. So I think that's been very
everything in computers. Yeah.
Everything in computers.
That's amazing. I never took physics in school. I guess you probably didn't either.
No, I'm a total noob. So
me too.
Yeah.
I learned to the extent that I know anything about physics is from working with physicists.
That's cool.
Who were awesome.
That's very cool.
And who suffer my constant barrage of questions about things. And I probably know enough physics to teach high school physics now.
Awesome.
Maybe even more because a lot of it's esoteric stuff. But I had to learn it the same way. Like it was on the job. I'm like trying to build spaceships. So I had to learn. I didn't even know what any of this stuff meant. I had to learn what does delta V mean. I had to learn like what photons are. Like I didn't even fucking know the difference between photons and electrons. You know, I'm like, I had to learn all that stuff the hard way, but I learned it in a context where I was interested in it. It was connected to a project, and so it made sense.
Yeah.
And physicists, in my experience, have been, you know, a lot of times they are the smartest people that I know. And I've thought about it a lot because I got to work with a wide variety of different kinds of smart people. And the cool thing about physicists, I don't know that they were smarter, but their worldview comes from first principles. It comes from the fundamentals. And so they end up with this amazing understanding of everything from the ones and zeros and the bits and the atoms all the way up. It's made me very excited. And, you know, one part of me thinks, well, that sucks that I didn't learn more physics in school, but it's probably my fault because I didn't stay long enough to do that. But I also think, especially compared to other sciences, it's so interesting and useful because if you learn physics, then you can go a lot of places. And also the physics education in universities is very, very heavy on math, and by necessity it involves a lot of coding. And so the physicists have turned out to be useful in a lot of ways. Their personalities can get in the way, but except for that, their training makes them useful at doing projects because they can code, they can think things through logically, they can think things through from first principles. I love it. It's so exciting that you're turned on to physics now, because that goes deep and has major rewards, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting and really challenging, and I'm just on 101 stuff.
How are you learning physics?
I mean, I try to set little maybe goals. I try to set goals for myself that some are hard goals and some are simple goals. If I just have the hard goals, then I get demotivated because it takes too long and I'm impatient. But if I set small goals as well, I get rewarded by those. So I return to those. I work on the hard goal for a bit, and then I return to the small goal. I get really interested in hardware. Again, back to like an iPhone, we have these things like we have these secure enclaves or trusted platform modules, basically chips that store secrets. And the idea being that if I grab your phone, I can't get in. I don't know your PIN. I can't easily reproduce your Face ID, your Touch ID, your fingerprint, hopefully. So FBI has tried to break in. They couldn't do it themselves. They had to hire, I believe, an Israeli firm to break in. So I want to, even on that chip, I'd like to have access. That security chip, I'd like to actually have access. And working with microcontrollers, which are really just small computers, sometimes I'll buy something, Xbox or whatever, and it'll have a microcontroller. And that will run some code, and I want to run different code. And it won't let you. It'll actually say, no, you can't run different code. Or if you do run different code, it's going to erase. You have to erase the existing code. I'm like, no, I want the code on there because I want to modify it. They're like, no, you can't have that because they put debug protection. They call them fuses. They're not actually fuses. They're e-fuses. It just means this computer, this mini computer, the microcontroller is a mini computer. It boots up. It checks this e-fuse, which is just something in memory. And it just says, hey, am I in debug mode, or am I allowed to go into debug mode or no? The bit is written at the factory. This is no, you can't go in debug mode. And it says, okay, and it starts up its boot sequence. And if someone tries to put it in debug mode by connecting the debugger, nope, I won't do that because I'm not allowed to. And in debug mode, you can expose all the software. You can download that software. You can modify it. You can upload it. You can then inspect the memory again. So it's like all that stuff, but instead of your computer, it's some other device, some smaller device typically. And I want to start getting access to those.
So it's like the BIOS on a PC or something is like
exactly,
this too.
Yeah. BIOS on a PC, the secure enclave in the phone, something in your Xbox or your PlayStation. If you're trying to run your own code on those things, maybe it's a wallet, a Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency wallet. So all of these have these protection mechanisms. And the thing is, you can do some cool stuff. So I started learning about glitching. So you can glitch. At the end of the day, if you look at how this computer works, and this is how all computers work, really, at least all digital computers, is that they have a clock, and that clock is basically going up, down. This is just going 1, 0, 1, 0. And whenever it goes from 1 to 0, call that the falling edge. So a bunch of stuff runs, a bunch of transistors do execute and perform some calculation. And one of those calculations is, every instruction in assembly, it's an instruction. It pulls this piece of data out of memory, and then it does a check. Is this equal to 1? If it is equal to 1, then it puts something in another register, and then it jumps if that's true. All those happening one at a time based off this clock. And if you don't have, say, enough power for one of those things, like pulling in that e-fuse for that one clock cycle, that 1 millisecond, microsecond, nanosecond, it will not be able to register the high voltage. The voltage is like at 3.3 volts, right? A 1 is really the digital 1 on a computer is really something like 3.3 volts or 1.8 volts or 5 volts. And if it can't get to 3.3 volts, and it's trying, it's there. There's a 1 that says, I won't allow debug mode. And you take away the 3.3 volts for that 1 microsecond, and you bring it down to 1 volt. Not so much that everything shuts off, but just that there's not enough voltage for it to register as a 1 when it goes into the register in memory.
Right.
It's now a 0. And then you return the voltage back to the computer, and you let everything continue to run. And now it thinks it can be in debug mode. That's tricky because
like a vending machine when you put in 3/4, hit E7, and then the spiral goes around and your Snickers bar doesn't quite fall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good analogy. I love that. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't quite fall.
Yeah.
So it tried to. It was there, and it didn't make it. Now, that sounds really hard because there's millions and millions. When something runs at 1 megahertz, that means it's a million instructions per second.
Yeah.
So how are you going to find the right one? Unfortunately, there's these things called computers that are really good at doing a lot of things and really lots of things fast. So you can hook up a computer. I use something
that
called
runs at gigahertz.
FPGA. That runs really fast. And it starts at the first instruction. And it pauses. I know it's running at a 16 megahertz crystal, so that's the clock speed. Say, for example, it's 16 megahertz. So I say, okay, each clock cycle is 1 second over 16 million, whatever that is. I then say, okay, program on my FPGA, or you're going to pull the voltage down of my device, of my phone or my Xbox or whatever. You're going to pull the voltage down to 1 volt for that microsecond. and then you're going to return it. And then you're going to try to go in debug mode. If it doesn't go in debug mode, if that fails, you're going to reset and you're going to wait another instruction cycle.
Yeah.
And then I come back to it half an hour later.
Yeah.
And hopefully I've gotten in. So
Yeah.
I got really interested in that. And there's tools for doing this. I started, building some new tools to do this more and more non-invasively, so I can do it without even opening, opening a computer, opening a device. And now I'm more interested in high energy particles because we have these things called single event upsets.
Okay.
So it's really cool. So I was reading Wikipedia about high energy particles because I heard about these things called single event upsets. And what all this is, a high energy particle, it's a computer. Because it's so high energy, it strips electrons off and it just goes right through it. But this is how we get, exactly, a suntan or leads to cancer because we have these high energy, ultraviolet rays that hit our skin. And that's so powerful. I have no idea what it actually does to our skin, but I think it breaks up DNA or breaks something up.
Because
cell mutation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like it can bombard these particles. They can go through almost anything, and they go right through you, and they're coming from space, and happening all the time. But you don't get very many. Like maybe once per second or so, one goes through your body. I'm making that number up.
Okay.
But if it strikes the DNA inside of a cell, which it can do because it can go right through it, then it can cause that cell to mutate. A lot of times the cells just die. It's no big deal, and it's only one cell. So even if it mutates but manages to divide and whatnot, it just doesn't go anywhere. But occasionally one mutates in a way that turns out to be beneficial, and very occasionally one mutates in a way that turns out to be detrimental and survive. And this is how everything about life evolved. This is why there's diversity in species. This is how you got two eyes and opposable thumbs. It's from cell mutation caused by gamma rays from space. And it's awesome. And then there's these other evolutionary processes like natural selection and whatnot that get rid of the things that got three eyes because that didn't turn out to be useful and it was extra energy to run a third eye and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And having all thumbs didn't work out either. So those ones all died off because they got beaten up by the guys with one thumb and four fingers, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of other processes involved, but it all starts with gamma rays. It's radiation from space is how we got to be so fucking awesome.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, going back to...
There's the electronic form where instead of destroying or potentially making interesting DNA, they call it a single event upset because it's a single event. It doesn't permanently, let's say, damage a transistor or memory cell, but it temporarily ionizes it, putting electrons in there or stripping electrons off, and that's actually how we communicate. That's how everything digital works, is the electrons. So electrons are moving around, and if you have a memory cell that has a floating gate FET, field effect transistor, that's how we store data in SD card or SSDs. And you can remove or add a electron with high energy. Then I heard stories of a plane crash that happened supposedly from one of these. And I'm just trying to think, okay, I'm an engineer, I work with a bunch of engineers, and if everyone's there's times where you just can't find a bug. That's what it sounded to me. It's oh yeah, I can't find a bug, it must be a high energy particle. And now I do believe that these are actually, some of these issues have come from them, but very much whenever I hear something oh no, it has to be wasn't my stuff. It's something from the sky.
Trying to blame.
I'm let me see that. Let me actually visualize it.
Yeah.
So actually, I got interested in visualizing it. I started looking, and there's something called the cloud chamber that you can make.
I built them too.
Nice. Nice. So I started looking at designing cloud chamber and ultimately build one. And it was interesting. I was reading on Wikipedia, how this cloud chamber was derived. And there's some scientist who was actually a meteorologist type person who was interested in clouds. That's why it's called the cloud chamber. It had nothing to do with radioactivity.
Oh.
So
he just wanted to make clouds.
He was trying to understand clouds, and how they form and how they move around.
This is where the number came from.
This is where the cloud chamber came from. It had nothing to do with radioactivity. This was a happy accident. I don't know the person's name, but the scientist was creating this, and I believe he was using water to produce clouds.
Okay.
He was heating and cooling, and he was trying to produce clouds inside of a chamber.
In a controlled, pressurized chamber. Yeah.
Yeah. So a controlled environment, and then every once in a while he'd see a wisp of something. He's like, whoa. I've never seen that in real life. And ultimately realized, okay, there's something that's coming from the earth and going through my cloud chamber and is really strong and, might be some high energy thing. And ultimately I ultimately wanted to test that and make sure, it's something coming from the earth. We don't know what it is. And I think they ultimately went in a hot air balloon. They expected as they go up, they should see less and less.
They should see them
they just see less and less because they thought it was coming from the Earth. They thought all these high energy particles are from the Earth.
Oh.
And they're going in a hot air balloon. They expect to see less and less. And as they go higher and higher, they start seeing more and more. And they're like, what?
Wait,
they're coming
took
from
the
space.
cloud chamber on the
balloon.
What I don't understand is if you ride the balloon into the clouds, why don't you see them? I actually don't understand that.
That's a good question. Honestly, you probably would, but these things are so small.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little video of one in my own, and it's just so tiny that you have to be like looking at it.
So what's your radiation source?
Nothing at
you're just using
I'm
waiting for
natural radiation. Granted, I ordered some Fiesta ware.
Yeah. No, I'll send you some uranium.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, we'll hook you up.
Awesome. Yeah.
Once you want a real radiation source, a little bit of uranium will do it.
Okay.
Just put it, and then you'll get a whole bunch.
Yeah, I bet.
And you'll get to see them. It's cool.
Yeah. And I mean,
You got a Geiger counter?
I do. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But there's this Fiestaware.
The red Fiestaware.
These red plates that I guess they're using some radioactive material for the color.
But it's very small amount in the red paint.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see. I'd just be curious to see that.
Yeah. I don't think you'll see anything.
I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, I guess we'll find out.
Or it'll be nominal.
But yeah, I was curious to see, okay, well, now that I can see it and I built a cloud chamber to do this, now I want to put a computer chip in there.
Right.
And put basically something like Arduino for memory.
Great.
And fill it with random data. And
You'll fill it with zeros.
Yeah, I could fill it with zeros. I don't know if I'm going to get a 1 or a 0 ultimately, so I could do both.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good idea.
It's easier
do
to
one
tell
or
if
both.
something flips out, anyway.
And then, just constantly read off and have a camera.
Yeah.
So I want to see both. I want to have a camera
awesome,
and an entirely, independent system that is electronic.
Right.
And I want to see the electronic system say, oh, that's weird. There's an error. There was supposed to be all zeros or all ones, and now there's not. And I want to see a timestamp, and I want to see a video. And I want to put them together, because I don't think that's ever been done, of seeing an actual high-energy particle modify a computer. And then if I can start controlling these high-energy particles and producing them, then I should be able to,
Control evolution.
Yeah, more interested on the digital side than the biological side.
Might be the same thing.
But I think that would be an interesting way to control these.
This is a rad project, which I've both never seen and I don't think ever thought of. So I love it. Computers in space, for example, is a problem. We have to shield them because otherwise you'll have too much of that, like so much radiation. And this is, it's a problem for humans in space. If you look at the study with the twins where one of them was an astronaut and he spent 300 days in space or whatever, I forgot his name, Chris something. There's a lot of detrimental effects to humans being out in space without an atmosphere to protect them.
Yeah.
And same with computers. So once you get this all working for fun, you should take it on a plane, because on a plane, you're actually being bombarded by a lot more radiation.
Yeah.
Because it's just aluminum and it doesn't insulate you very well. And being 6 miles up in the atmosphere, you get a lot more. So maybe once you build the thing, you could test it more on a plane, depending on how often it might take a year to get an error off the one you're building. But if you take it on a plane, it should be, I don't know if it's like an order of magnitude or something, probably more radiation. And then if that doesn't work, we'll put it on a balloon.
Oh, that's a good idea. That'd be really cool.
We'll put it on a balloon.
Yeah.
And send it up to, probably can get easily to 70, 80,000 feet. You could also probably put it on a spacecraft, but the problem with that is, well, it's not a problem. You just want to know like what the spacecraft is made of, because it might be insulating as well, because they use exotic metals in these modern spacecraft.
Okay.
So it could have an effect. If that doesn't work, then you build it as a CubeSat,
right,
and you have the spacecraft take it up, jettison the thing, and then you would have unfettered access to radiation from space,
right,
and you can see what effect it has. This actually, now we're into territory that may have actually been tested before by Motorola, even in the past, when they're trying to figure out about building satellites and computers in space and how much effect does the radiation have on them. Have you ever tried decapping chips?
Yes.
Oh,
do
okay.
that at home now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So instead of like a chemical fume hood and
okay, all right.
Started to learn using acids. I heard an interesting story. I assume it's true. I've never validated it, but I heard that when astronauts were first going into space, there was an astronaut and he started seeing flashes of light and was like, oh no, there's something wrong with me. So he didn't tell anybody. Someone else also started seeing flashes of light. All these astronauts were seeing flashes of light, but were afraid to say anything. And ultimately, like someone finally said, hey, did you see that like flash? Like it wasn't actually like any real light.
Right.
And he's like, oh yeah, I'm seeing flashes of light too. And apparently, supposedly these high energy particles are basically going through their retina or some part of their eye and causing them to see light, even though there's no light. And they would see it even when their eyes are closed.
No, and that's probably serious damage.
I don't know. I have no idea, but it's kind of interesting trying to think of putting myself in that position and be like, I'm not telling anybody that I've seen things.
That's one issue. I mean, although you'd think astronauts would be trained to like talk about any weird stuff just for the captain's log or whatever. I have been in labs where they had an electron microscope and they could use the ion beam to decap a chip, modify the transistors in the chip, put the cap back on.
Oh, yeah. Focused ion beam to lay down and remove and add metal. That's pretty cool. That'd be really interesting.
I won't speculate about what they were using it for on record. Yeah, there's some sophisticated shit out there. Might be fun to get you a SEM with an ion beam someday.
Yeah.
When you get bored.
Yeah, I think we have some friends who have this kind of equipment and are doing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, there you go. There's a lot of potential now that you're down into the actual physics of chip. A lot of cool things you could do.
Yeah, and so much I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's cool stunts to do. I mean, hacking iPhones has a certain appeal since so many people have them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've definitely been trying to get away from attacking specific companies and more attacking like protocols. And that's why I'm interested in physics, because I'm not attacking anything. I'm just attacking the way our world works. So I think that's become more interesting.
Mother Nature is more forgiving than Apple.
Yeah, it's just cool when you find an issue with something that is just entirely prevalent and is the way everything works. That's just the way it works. It's like this wasn't a vulnerability. It's just maybe we didn't see that this would happen.
And I think it's a really important part of the process for bolstering the protocols.
Yeah.
If we don't figure out, if we don't aggressively attack them and figure out how to make, where they fail and what their limits are, then we can't make them better fast enough to stay ahead of actual attackers.
Yeah. There's many things that can still be attacked that we don't think about that are fundamental to how everything works.
How did you manage to keep from like actually working in computer security?
I didn't want it to impact how enjoyable it was. I knew that if this became my job, it wouldn't be interesting anymore.
Oh, that's an interesting point. I think that's what happened to me. I started working in it and it wasn't interesting.
Yeah, so I always stuck to engineering. Like I knew like just software in a non-security, non-cyber security type thing would be interesting.
Smart move.
I just always stuck with that. And I liked business. I think business itself is really interesting. So I try to understand how businesses work. And
good luck with that.
Yeah, it's challenging. And I really like to learn from other people who have done it. I've been very fortunate to have worked with co-founders in 2 companies now that have built successful companies and that have done it again. So learning a lot from them and working with them. I like breaking things. I like building things. And
that's the way it should be.
It's really cool.
It seems to me like you've been pretty good about that kind of self-awareness, like understanding like this is what I like to do.
Trying to learn my own weaknesses and the things that are like.
Are the things you actively try to avoid? Yoga? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up.
No, I mean yoga would be good for me. I do actively avoid it because it's hard, but I'm sure it would be beneficial.
Oh, okay, I don't know.
Yeah, I was making YouTube videos for a while.
You're not doing anymore?
I stopped. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it, and I found that it was like a high. I get high off releasing a video. I knew that a bunch of people would like it. A bunch of awesome comments.
Right.
It was like beneficial. It was fun. The projects were interesting. It got me to like try to finish projects. And then I also realized, wow, my happiness is dependent on a bunch of people that I don't know. And I'm okay with my happiness being dependent on people that I respect and know. But it's really tough when I'm like, wait, why am I being necessarily controlled? Not that they're controlling me, but I'm allowing my own happiness to be controlled by a mob, and not a mob in any negative way. It's a large group of people that I don't know. And that's my own weakness. And like, I wish I could just not enjoy it so much. Like I'm okay with chopping off the peaks if it removes the valleys. So I try to compress my emotional state. I like peaks. I want to feel that high, but I know that will probably come with some sort of valley. It didn't, but I just felt like it could. And I felt like, oh my God, I was spending so much time thinking, okay, well, this needs to be actually good for a video. Like, otherwise, why am I spending my time on this? So it became this obsessive thing I thought about. And I'm like, why am I obsessing about this? Because I care what other people who I don't know will think about something. And like, no, I don't want other people to control my mind. And that's my own issue. Nothing to do with them. Yeah. It's just me like wanting to feel that ego boost. I think I really enjoyed that. I still do. But then I'm like, all right, it was fun. I loved it. I really enjoyed doing it. Yeah. But I'd rather try to absorb those peaks from other things that are not controlled by a large group of people that I don't know. Okay. I guess I found that was my concern. So I just, at that point, I was like, okay, I should stop this, or maybe I'll return if I can chill myself out, not look at these numbers, not care about the output.
Are you your own psychotherapist, or did you get some help from like Scientologists or what? No, I'm kidding.
No, I didn't go to anyone. I think I was actually like, wait, why am I concerned about what other people think? For me, I think my own basic rule that I've tried to establish for myself is like, I should do whatever I want, and I think people should do whatever they want as long as they're not intentionally hurting somebody else. And that's the kind of base thing that I try to go off, that in the golden rule. But now I just like was thinking about it, like, why am I feeling that I have to do all this stuff for these people when like this is also probably a short-term thing? I think that was another thing. That was another issue for me. I was like, I've been learning that the more I invest time in something, the cooler output I can create. The higher peak I can actually reach, but that takes longer time. So I used to do projects that were weekend projects. I mean, every weekend I would do a project. Every weekend I still work on projects. Then I found like sometimes I could create something really cool once a year on one of those weekends.
Okay.
Right? I'd do weekend projects every weekend, and then one weekend would be like an awesome project. And then I started spending time a week on a project.
I see.
Create even better
Try to
projects.
outdo.
I can create cooler stuff.
I get it.
If I want it now, I'm at the point, I'm 35 now. I want to spend years on a project. Or besides business, I want to spend even on my free time years on something, because that will probably be incredible. If I have to constantly think, oh man, did I release a video because I have to like appease the algorithm and all this stuff, it's going to actually detract from what I'm capable of producing in the future. So I did cut that off so that I can now focus more of my time on a larger, more interesting project, and I have no idea what that is. It's more like learning. So it's a lot of learning now. Never thought about that, but like, this
is really interesting because there's a certain value to delayed gratification. So that's one aspect to this. You know, if you have to feed the algorithm, by extension, the people who are clicking on shit and watching it and whatever, then it's making you optimize for short-term goals.
Correct.
And so the potential is there for you to achieve more important or bigger long-term goals if you aren't distracted or fixated on them.
Distracted.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty awesome. I mean, there's so few people who can focus on long-term goals at all, that the fact that you somehow decided you want to do that is incredible. Like, you should just fucking run with that.
Yeah, I'm lucky because I had short-term goals, and then I had slightly longer-term goals and slightly longer-term, and I was like, wow, I actually get better and better things when I invest more
that's
time in
amazing.
something.
I mean, for a minute there, I thought I should try and help this guy figure out how he can go back to making the videos for YouTube because he loves it. But honestly, like, we have a lot of people making YouTube videos, not like yours, but there's plenty of that. And it is very short-term oriented thing. And if there is something we need in the world, it's more long-term thinking of every type.
Yeah, it's cool. And I mean, I love YouTube. I love YouTube creators, and they make really cool stuff, especially when they're already experts in sharing stuff. So that's super cool. I was just thinking, for my personal happiness, I'm going to. And again, I think a lot of my life is like, I'm actually just trying to minimize those peaks and valleys of emotions.
I don't know. I mean, that one.
And not necessarily the peaks, but I think if I am addicted to this peak, there will probably be a valley afterwards. And how do I reduce? I'm trying to get rid of the valleys, right? I don't want to. That's what I don't want to. And so I try not to put a lot of desire on things, right? Because that, if I can't get it, or I don't get it, or I fail at something, the valley won't be nearly as bad or as bad at all.
There's certainly a natural human thing where we try to minimize suffering.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's the reduce the valleys part.
I mean, I still feel great when good things happen.
That's good. Certainly, like, you're entitled to minimize valleys, but you're really fucking good at handling them and turning them into growth. Like, you've already done that. I'm not saying go get more valleys, but I'm more pissed off about the way you were treated by the justice system than you are.
Okay.
And there's really no reason at all that I should give a shit. But you were like, okay, I did something wrong. I paid my dues. You really handled it. Like, you overcame, that's fucking adversity, and you overcame it and thrive. And it's amazing and commendable. And everybody should learn from that. You know, when I was younger, maybe I could have done it. Now, it would be too difficult for me to accept that.
Okay.
And even I can't even accept it on your behalf. To me, it's like, this is fucking unjust, and I'm going to get revenge, and I'm not even normally like that. So there are so many good stories and so many examples in your life already. And it's not just that, if your dad, the shit with your mom, all that kind of stuff that, I don't know the details, but I don't need to. Like, there's adversity there.
Sure.
And you overcame the adversity. And when you look in your life, and when I look at my life, the only people I'm interested in are the ones who suffered adversity and it didn't break them. They somehow overcame that and thrive. Those are the people who I value. It's not the ones who escaped it. They're not interesting. You inherited this money from your dad, you invested it in real estate, and now you're like golfing. Fucking amazing guy. That's not interesting to me. Cool new yacht. I don't give a shit. Those people are not interesting. And the ones who succumb, which is what you see the most. So many people, and you can't blame them, but they succumb to adversity. It breaks them. They become angry, they become vengeful, they become broken, and they are unable to thrive. And it's sad, and wouldn't wish it on anyone, but also those people are very hard to put to good use too, because they're broken. But the ones who find a way to overcome that adversity and find a way to thrive, those are the best people, and you're one of them. You're one of those people. And you could argue, other people had it worse than me and I got lucky because I only got 3 years or whatever it is. But it's not a contest. Everybody has something, and it's how you handle it. And you handle it so well. Reducing the valleys, kind of get it. I've had lots of valleys that I fucking wish I didn't have to, but you learn from them.
But like you said, you wish you didn't, right? You wish you didn't. You probably are happy that you went through some of them. You're probably like, oh, this was awesome for me. Yeah. This was good because I learned something out of it, or I became stronger in certain ways. But you would never wish it for yourself again.
Or on anyone else.
Or on anyone else, even if you're going to learn from it. I don't want to trigger a valley for me, even if I'm going to learn from this.
But I know, but you don't.
I'm glad everything happened in the past, right?
That's right. That's the story you tell. You wouldn't change it.
But I would never wish it upon myself.
I know, but it's like paradoxical.
Well, that's because it already happened, right?
Yeah.
We already went through it. It's easy to say after you've gone through something.
But like, how much effort needs to go into valley avoidance?
If I could go back in time and like, hey, this was gonna happen, this weird feel, I'm like, nope.
I know. I know. I don't know. Some things. So for example, I think you do this too in a way. There's personal growth that I want, that I know I need. So one example that I think is easy to understand is when salsa dancing became an obsession for me. The process of learning to dance, learning to salsa, for a guy really sucks, because you have to go ask girls to dance knowing that you suck.
Okay.
And they're not going to be impressed.
That sounds hard. Yeah.
It sounds really hard. And if you don't drink, because I don't drink, and probably should have learned to drink before learning salsa, would have made it easier. It's really hard. There were nights when I would just go to salsa, sit and watch, and never ask a girl to dance, because I was a beginner and I knew I sucked. And I would go back to class, learn a little bit more, and work my way. That process, it really was frustrating for me. I'm not proud of how I handled it. I should have been more outgoing and sucked it up. But it was tough for me to do that. I couldn't put somebody through dancing with me, knowing that I sucked. Now it's a little different because I can dance and I feel confident enough about it that I can do it. But I kept going back for years.
Okay.
Knowing that I sucked, I kept going back. I would go out and be like some nights, it'd be like, if I saw somebody I knew from class, I'd be like, oh, let's dance, and then it was because they already knew I sucked and I knew they sucked, so it was fine. It was painful, and I put myself through it,
Oh, that's really cool. And I like that. And I know you don't suck anymore, and you're awesome now. Yeah. But I also would
Only
say
people who don't dance salsa think I'm awesome.
Well, yeah, I don't. I also think it's okay to suck, right? And to
that's right.
Suck indefinitely. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's okay too.
Yeah, that's right. And I think maybe that was an example of one where the valley wasn't so bad that I quit, and maybe if it had been worse, I would have.
I probably would have quit immediately.
Well, but you have other things that you didn't quit. I quit machine language as soon as I could. I quit disassembling as soon as I could. I'm the guy running the other direction, going to higher and higher level. I'm not even coding. Python is beneath me. I'm if I can't do it in English, I'm not doing it. I code via email now, and I can't wait to get my hand on Codex. I don't know if you've seen the OpenAI project.
Oh, yeah.
That you just talk to it and it writes code. I haven't had time to dig into that yet because I know it will be a huge rabbit hole for me, but I can't wait.
Cool.
And I'm like already okay, now that exists, what abstraction layer can I go on top of it? Because I'm like, all these things are building blocks for me. They're Lego bricks for me. I'm like trying to build with all these technologies. So I don't want to go deeper if I don't have to. Having done that helps me so much, but not what I'm doing. And so I love about you is you're just going the other direction. You're like deeper. Disassembling, running processes on an iPhone wasn't good enough. I'm going to go down and figure out what that transistor is doing and see if I can stop one electron at a time. I love it. It's great.
I'm not an expert in anything, but I have some decent amount of knowledge and small amounts of knowledge in many areas in technology.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to go more into science because I find that like you have a little bit of knowledge here and a little bit of knowledge there, and you tie those together and you create way cooler stuff than an expert in either area.
That's exactly right. That is the story of my life.
So I find that super interesting.
I'm so thrilled you said that because that is where the action is. So I don't know if we've talked about this before. At the lab, we would try to hire people who were what we call T-shaped. T-shaped is a way of describing somebody who has deep expertise in something, but can work as a generalist, communicate as a generalist
I see.
across a wide variety of topics. So they're shallow and wide in their interests, maybe, but they have a depth of knowledge that might be narrow, but deep in something. That describes me. Because I started with computers, mainly just I got a head start. And so I learned what all the little ones and zeros were doing at a young age. And then I could build on top of that. So I've been learning about computers for so long, it's just hard to catch up with me. So I have a depth of knowledge in that, but none of my projects really I'm not trying to advance computation mostly, right? I'm not trying to advance computer science in a few cases maybe, but most of my projects are in other things. So like I worked on a brain surgery tool. I know fuck all about brain surgery. But because I have that depth of knowledge, I've been able to respect the world's leading expert in brain surgery, sit him down, pick his brain, get his help with the invention, try to figure out what was going to work and what wasn't. I think the main thing it helped me with is it gave me the respect for their depth of knowledge. I know when I'm out of my own depth, and I can communicate with them as a peer because they also believe that I know a lot about something, even if it's irrelevant. And so it helps me to have that kind of relationship with somebody who has a depth of knowledge. And that is so important because all the easy shit's been done. Like the things that are left to do are at the borders of different areas in science and technology. You look at any invention these days and it's cross-pollinating something from physics with something from biology with machine learning, like you sprinkle that on everything. It's got to be at the intersections. And so the people who have a depth of knowledge in something, which you certainly do, but have enough interest to go play another, we used to call them polymath. Polymath is somebody who knows about a bunch of different things. But really, when you look at a polymath, almost all of them, with rare exception, they just have a wide span of interest and they probably have something they were deep in that they can relate it to. And again, because learning is about taking the new thing and connecting it to what you already know. That's fundamentally defines learning. That's what learning is. You take a new thing and you connect it to what you know. And if you don't know anything, you have nothing to connect it to. So the failure modes are, and it's easy to spot. You see, like scientists, we train them to be narrow. That's I-shaped. They're narrow and deep in one thing. You define yourself as a scientist or research scientist by becoming the world's leading expert in a super narrowly defined thing, like the left earlobe of the sub-Saharan caterpillar or whatever. It's that narrow. Because that's how you stake out some turf. You would find some turf with no competition. And a lot of times those people they're useless as inventors because they don't know how to appreciate and communicate and respect the depth of knowledge of someone else. And they don't have enough generalist interest to cross that chasm. And you see it in academia. You got a world-class expert in an office down the hall from another world-class expert in a slightly different field. And they don't hang out together. They don't collaborate. A lot of times their incentives are opposed. So, and then the other failure mode is the generalist who has no depth. And you see this, like we often characterize millennials this way. What can you do? I can do anything. Okay, well, I can't hire somebody who can do anything. I can hire somebody who can do something reliably or well, and so they're, they didn't ever go deep in anything. And so they don't have that sense of perspective. And so I think so the T-shaped people are the most valuable. They're the ones we need the most. And that's what we got to figure out how to make more of. And but you're an example of one of them, which is awesome. And increasingly so.
Cool.
So yeah, go nuts with that. I think it's cool. Personally, I'm like just wildly impressed with what you've chosen to prioritize. Like you're making really great life choices. I don't know if that maps to like feeling like you had to make them for yourself from such a young age or what, but like that's a pretty impressive amount of self-awareness to figure out I have awesome YouTube channel. I'm a star. Everybody loves me. I get great dopamine hits. And I think I'm just gonna, get a more balanced life by just not doing the thing I love. I don't know. That's a pretty impressive thing to do. Most people are probably on the other end of that going, I could use some dopamine. I wish I had a YouTube channel that anybody didn't post asshole comments on.
I gotta say, I was surprised by the comments. Almost everyone positive. It was very positive.
Yeah, I've never seen that before. All the comments on videos of me are pretty derogatory. So I don't know if you know this. Well, you know that I do a lot of public speaking.
Yeah.
And I did it because at first I did it because I just thought it was funny to like go scare the shit out of people by stealing their passwords live on stage. And then I started to try to have a point. Once a year, I'll do a talk that does not have you in the deck. You may not know this, but I've been all over the world, hundreds of thousands of people in live audiences. I don't even keep track. I'm making up numbers. It's at least that. And almost always I start my talk with a slide that shows the population growth curve for humans.
Okay.
And a lot of people have just never seen that.
Huh. I don't think I have.
But it turns out humans emerged maybe 160,000 years ago or so, as we know them, Homo sapiens. And then it's just like thousands, and then it's like hundreds of thousands for like, millennia. And then it's like millions for a couple more millennia. And then not until the last 200 years do we go from millions to billions.
Wow.
So like when you look at the classic Silicon Valley exponential growth curve, whatever, it's human population follows that curve. And the real reasons for that are things like diseases, eradicating humans. I mean, most people don't realize 400 million people died of smallpox alone.
Wow.
Before vaccination was invented.
Crazy.
Yeah, it just wasn't possible for more humans to exist because they would just fucking die because we couldn't feed them, we couldn't keep them, it wasn't lions and tigers and bears killing us off. It was these mostly infectious disease and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I think it's really important. I use that every time because I want to give them a sense of perspective about where they exist on the span of human history. They exist at the top of that growth curve. Like we exist now because of all the problems that we've solved or partially solved that were keeping humans from thriving. And that's feeding people, giving them jobs, creating economies, giving them homes, building homes. All that kind of stuff. That's humans inventing a technology that helped us solve a problem at a larger scale. I use that just to help people get a sense of like, okay, what's going on here? Well, what's going on is we have to figure out how to take care of 7 billion humans now. But the next slide that I always show, I used to talk about you for 20 minutes. Like I'd show like, this is Sammy, this is the cool, because I don't want to talk about myself and I want to show you have so many great hacking exploits that are fun that people can relate to. And that's what I was trying to show. And I'm trying to help people understand that part of what sucks about them is their brains are programmed by whatever mechanisms out there to like brainwash people to not be very interesting. And your brain is a great example of the kind of brain that can figure out what's possible. So now I've whittled you down to one slide, and I usually only I'm like, this is Sammy, and let me show you one cool thing about him that he did, but I use that as an example of hackers. I think are great, and why I like to talk about them is because Most people don't really know them. They stay in the basement, and they have these amazing brains that can figure out what's possible. You're so good at figuring out what's possible, and sometimes it requires, a lot of nights and weekends and sacrificing other things you could do and a lot of focus that a lot of people don't give things. I don't know if you've seen the latest season of Orange is the New Black. Yeah, no. See, you're not fucking around. You're not wasting your life on Netflix, which is fine because we have a lot of people who can do that. There's a lot of really good Netflix experts out there. We should leave it to them. But you are, devoting yourself to learning to go deeper, and you're learning how to figure out what's possible. And I use that as an example, even though you don't probably think of yourself as an inventor. I think of you as an inventor because this is where the inventions start. It starts with, figuring out what is possible. From that, you can then go figure out, okay, what's useful? Like how do we build from this? One thing I think would be interesting to pick apart is, like the company that you have now, you're doing these door access systems. The product, I'm guessing, probably came from you figuring out like, oh, we could actually do this in a different way.
Yeah, sitting with my co-founders, and we were actually sitting in our friend's office. He lent us his key card to get into his office, and it was beautiful office in Range Ray, and it was on, I don't know, the 12th floor or something, and I'd go up, and then someone would call, one of the co-founders would call me, Alex or James, and be like, hey, I'm here, and I'd go back down and be a pain in the ass. I'd have to like go down the elevator or take another 5 minutes, and like, this is like so annoying. And then I think one day we got an office, and we had a business idea that we started working on, unrelated to what we're doing today, and we had like lost our parking badge, and it was a huge deal. It like cost a lot of money to replace, and it was just like such a pain. It's like, why is this so hard? Why can't we just use our phone for something like this? And like, I could just use my phone to unlock the door downstairs if I want to let someone in, or if I could just exit the parking lot because my phone is in my pocket, and hey, that has wireless technology like Bluetooth. Why doesn't that just talk to the parking gate and it can just let me out or let me in? And then we're like, wait, what we're doing is actually our original idea is like, this makes way more sense, because the problem we constantly run into, we've all previously had companies and we had to deal with badges, and they were always a pain. Maybe we should build a physical access control solution that's just like easy to use and not a pain, and also secure, because you and I also know that these things are super insecure, and you demo stealing credit cards over RFID. Well, it's the same thing for access control, right? You can steal anyone's access.
We got this device off of like AliExpress.
Okay.
That you just point it at any HID card, and it'll and then you can read it, and then if you have blank ones, you can write it.
Exactly.
And so you can just anyone can do it.
Yeah,
you could just stand by the door, and when someone walks by, just clone their card. It's so dumb.
Nuts. Yeah. So we still support cards. So we support cards if you want, and then we also have our own cards which are encrypted and unique. The company's called OpenPath.
Oh, it's called OpenPath.
Yeah, OpenPath.
The thing I think is, that's missing from that story though is like any other couple of guys could have sat down and thought, okay, I installed a HID card system in a hospital when I was 14 years old. This is 1983 or something, right? 84. And they haven't markedly changed since then. Mm-hmm. Any group of guys could sit down and say, oh, yeah, these cards are stupid. It sucks. I have to go get my card. It costs a bunch to replace it. But maybe you take this for granted, but you had already dug enough into Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and RFID and those things to start to put those pieces together and understand like what could be built at the edge of what's technically possible, what's practical, what's economical, what's useful in the market. Putting that whole puzzle together, that's what makes it possible. Is you have to put that puzzle together. That's what a tech entrepreneur needs to do. And an entrepreneur who doesn't know anything about tech can't put a puzzle together that's at the edge of what's possible. They can only do what they've seen done before.
Interesting.
And this is why we have a lot of shitty startups made by maybe awesome entrepreneurs who don't know how to create something new or valuable or that at the edge of what's practical. And I just think you take this for granted, but it's a big deal.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I like if I could distill it into a very simple thing, because like that's how I understand things. Is I try to distill them, and I try to have a very basic system that I can reuse.
Okay.
Right? Because I don't like complex things. I want to understand how things work, and I just want a very simple, like a little bit of information to understand something. And it was what we have right now is a pain to use. So we thought the next best thing was we make an app.
Okay.
And we made a prototype. We made an app
Yeah.
And it allowed opening the door. And I think the first day we're all like, this is cool. And I think I tried it once and it was neat. And then I walked out and I walked back into the room to like test it. And like, no, this is terrible because this isn't better. It's more work. It's like we all like realized after a few days, no, this is actually worse.
Yeah.
Because I have to pull my phone out. I have to unlock my phone.
Yeah.
I have to find the app.
Yeah.
I have to get out of my Gmail, find the app, open the app, hit the door that I want to unlock.
Yeah.
It would be versus a card that I could pull out of my pocket and swipe.
Or just
I
smack
might as well
your
just,
butt up against the
oh
reader.
yeah, smack your
know.
bucket. I might as well just tape a card to my phone. That would actually be easier because then I could just take my phone out.
Yep, there you
and,
go.
and swipe it, and that would
Or
be
embed
easier.
an RFID in the back of your hand.
Yeah,
Hey.
yeah, oh yeah. So exactly. And at that point, we're like, why would we? If it's not easier, then what's the point? Like, why are we making something not as good? Like maybe it's good in some ways. You forget, people forget their cards. They don't forget their phones. But if it's easier, and I think like that's how we distilled at least this idea is like, this is not better. We made something worse.
Yeah.
We've actually created something worse that would probably be fine for a lot of people. People would be like, oh, it's on a phone. I like that. And probably some people would buy it. And then we started thinking, and we're like, oh no, what if we don't pull out our phone and don't, just like, today you have to pull out a card or smack your butt. What if you don't pull out your phone and you just walk in, you touch the reader, you wave at the reader, and it just knows it already connected to your phone over Bluetooth. Then it can authenticate. You can use actual secure encryption that you can't just copy with a cloner, even if you inspect it, even if you sniff all the traffic.
Cool.
Because we are using TLS. Like we are using SSL.
TLS, but in whose issue?
Over
the
Bluetooth.
certs? Oh, okay.
And we
TLS over Bluetooth. Okay.
Yeah. And then anyone can issue, everyone has their own certificates that are unique, and they can reprovision at any time. They control their certificates. Yeah, so it's not public CAs or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then
Don't use
once we
public
did that,
CAs, kids.
yeah, I mean, why is the Hong Kong Post Office able to release a certificate for your domain?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It went so far off the rails. Like your browser has like 1,000 root certs.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's like taking the key to your front door, making 1,000 copies and giving them
Yeah.
to the nearest 1,000 neighbors and telling them like, oh, you try not to give it to anyone shady. Yeah.
Right.
So bad.
Yeah.
So far.
And I mean, even ones that are trustworthy, like one of them will get hacked.
It
right,
does.
every
Yeah.
year.
Right. No, it does.
Right.
You don't have to hack anyone in particular. You just have to hack
Right.
any of them.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so bad. It's so dumb the way that played out. Anyway, never mind that.
But yeah, I think if I could distill it was like, okay, what makes my life easier? That was ultimately, I think, how it went down. Is like, what makes our lives easier?
That's the art.
And then you put in the things that you learn, like, okay, we should make it secure so it's not easy to hack, and like.
But it's the willingness to put an absurd amount of work of hard work into making your life easier.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And it's really funny because I think you might be like this, but I know I'm like that when I'm like, okay, I could send a PCB to Osh Park and not have to worry about it, or I could learn how to mill and spend honestly months of my time trying to get the CNC mill to work and like cut PCBs. And finally I got another mill that was much better. And then that was awesome. And now I can just do it at the drop of a hat.
Oh, do you have an other mill?
I do have another mill now.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
But
My buddy Bree made those.
Oh, awesome.
And they're very cool.
Oh, they're amazing. Yeah.
Oh, good. You're happy. Okay, that's awesome.
I love it. Once I got another mill, PCBs were super easy. I spent 6 months trying to get another CNC mill to try to make them. And I was successful in doing it. But yeah, I just spent a lot of time so that I could do something a little bit easier. The investment of time probably doesn't make sense, but it's also really fun.
More.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Right. I mean, I'm doing less of that in my life now, but so much of my life was like trying to get my hands on tools and learn to use them in a wildly inefficient way.
But also running every piece of software you could, right? To learn how
all
it
that
works.
stuff. Same thing. And it was hardware too. That's like why, I mean, a lot of the jobs I took, like going to work at Blue Origin, it was like they had bought out this machine shop.
Okay.
And the old machinist whose shop they had bought, he came with it.
Nice. Awesome.
So we had this machinist and all these. And none of this was CNC. He brought all like the
nice. Manual.
pre-CNC.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
all manual.
We had mills and lathes and everything that were all manual, and he had a pile of like just tools, everything.
Yeah.
And we eventually obviously got CNC. But I would just look at these machines and just fantasize about what I could make with them. And then I went to work for Nathan Myhrvold. He told us what he wanted to do. He's like, well, I want to do this invention lab. He told us the whole thing. And we're like, that sounds crazy. That's not going to work. We're completely convinced that it was crazy and not going to work. But even as we were sitting there with Nathan, like trucks were showing up full of tools.
Oh, wow.
He'd been staying up past midnight every day on like industrial auctions, buying every piece of, it was like Noah's Ark for scientific equipment and for tools. So we had, he had this huge building he'd gotten to build the lab in, and we're just watching these tools show up that we'd always fantasized about having, and we're like, holy shit. Well, maybe, like it sounds crazy, but let's just tell him that we'll give it a shot. Yeah. So we started working at the lab to get our hands on these tools. And Nathan was crazy. He bought one of every tool in the world. And we had this warehouse, not the lab, but a warehouse of overflow tools. We had 8,000 tools that wouldn't fit in the lab just there because we bought them. And it turns out tools don't hold their value, like especially scientific equipment, and it doesn't change very much. Usually it's like the new one is like, Windows 2000 instead of Windows 98, but it does the same thing. And so you can buy them for pennies on the dollar because, these, research labs will buy all this $100,000 machine and then they get defunded and they just auction the crap off. And so a lot of times you get tools used for cheap.
It's really cool.
And we just bought them all and it was amazing. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of my life was trying to get access to tools to learn them. Wildly inefficient, learned a lot, wouldn't change a thing.
That's really cool.
I think this will be fun to share.
Awesome.
Like there'll be a lot of people who like hearing this conversation.
Very cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I couldn't be more impressed. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for doing it. It's really cool.